When the judge said the divorce was final, I didn't look at Brian. I didn't wait for his reaction. Didn't search his face for anything that used to matter. I leaned toward my attorney and said, "Start it now." My voice was steady, like this was just another decision, not the end of 15 years. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and 10 minutes after that sentence was spoken, I was fastening my youngest son into an airplane seat while my other two sat beside me, quiet in a way children only get when they know something has changed but don't yet understand how far it goes. I had packed their bags the night before. Small ones. Just enough to move without questions. Across the city, Brian wasn't thinking about any of this. He was somewhere bright, surrounded by his family, standing next to the woman he chose over us. They were waiting for confirmation of a future they believed was already theirs, smiling like everything had worked out exactly the way it should. They thought the hard part was over. They thought the story had already ended. What none of them knew was that the real consequences hadn't even started yet, and by the time they realized it, there would be no way to stop what was already in motion. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this pull you in, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment so I know you're here with me. By the time a marriage ends in court, most of the damage has already happened in private. People expect tears in a room like that. Raised voices, something loud enough to match the word final. But the truth is, by the time you get there, there's nothing left to break. It's already been done in smaller, quieter ways no one else ever sees. I didn't cry when the judge signed the papers. I had done that months earlier, standing in the kitchen long after the kids were asleep, staring at a message that didn't belong to me anymore. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a name I didn't recognize, a tone that felt too familiar, too easy. The kind of message you can explain away if you want to. I didn't want to. After that, it wasn't one moment, it was a pattern. Late calls that ended when I walked into the room. A second phone he said was for work but never left his side. Changes in his schedule that didn't quite line up. Small gaps that only made sense if you were already looking for them. I didn't confront him right away. I watched. I listened. I paid attention. Brian had always been good at staying one step ahead, at least he believed he was. He built his life around control, around knowing how things would play out before they happened. He hated delays, paperwork, anything that slowed him down or forced him to explain himself more than once. That was part of what made him successful, and part of what made him careless. Because people like that don't expect to be questioned. They expect things to move in their favor because they always have. When the truth finally settled into something I couldn't ignore, it didn't come with a confrontation. Came with clarity. I understood what I was looking at and, more importantly, what I was standing inside of. That's when the crying stopped and the planning started. I spoke to Thomas Reed quietly, weeks before anything was filed. Not once but several times. We went over everything, not just what I knew but what could be verified, what mattered legally, and what would hold up when it actually counted. He didn't rush me and I didn't rush the process. Every document was checked twice. Every step was deliberate. By the time we walked into that courtroom, I wasn't reacting to what Brian had done. I was already moving past it. The terms looked simple from the outside. He kept the house, most of the accounts tied to his business, the structure he had built over the years. I took the kids and a settlement that didn't raise questions. Anyone watching would have assumed I walked away with less. That assumption was necessary, because what Brian signed that morning wasn't the end of anything. It was the point where everything he thought was settled could finally be questioned in a way he wouldn't be able to control. By late afternoon, the city was already behind us and the quiet felt almost unfamiliar. It wasn't just the distance. It was the pace. Everything moved slower here, like the day wasn't trying to keep up with anything. The house was exactly what I had arranged. Small, clean, nothing that would draw attention. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen. A living room that looked out onto a quiet street where no one seemed to be in a hurry. It wasn't the life we had left behind, but that was the point. Rachel Bennett was already waiting when we pulled in. She gave me a brief hug, the kind that didn't ask questions, and smiled at the kids like she had known them longer than she actually had. "You made good time," she said, stepping aside so we could bring the bags in. Rachel and I had reconnected weeks earlier. Not closely, not in a way that would invite curiosity, just enough for me to ask the right questions and get the help I needed without explaining everything. She worked with the local school system, knew how things were processed, who to talk to, what forms mattered. Practical things. Ava was the first to walk through the house, quiet, observant, taking in every detail. Mason dropped his bag near the door and asked where the nearest basketball court was. Caleb stayed close to me, one hand wrapped around my sleeve, looking at everything like it might change again if he blinked. "This is where we're staying?" Ava asked after a moment. "For now," I said. That was enough. She nodded, not pushing further. Rachel went over the basics quickly. School registration was already in progress. There were supplies in the kitchen, a few groceries in the fridge, contact numbers written down on a sheet by the counter. Nothing complicated, just enough to make the first few days easier. While the kids moved around the house, I stepped outside and finally checked my phone. 7 missed calls. 4 from Brian. 3 from a number I didn't need saved to recognize. I didn't open any messages. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I called Thomas. He answered without hesitation. "You're there," he said. "We just arrived," I replied. A brief pause, then, "All right." Then it started. I leaned against the railing, watching the quiet street in front of the house. "What does that mean so far?" "There's been activity," he said. "A few of the accounts tied to Brian's business have been flagged for review. Nothing public yet, but it won't stay contained for long." I didn't respond right away. "And the clause?" I asked. "It's in motion," he said. "Once the discrepancies are formally acknowledged, the agreement he signed this morning can be revisited." I exhaled slowly, not relief, not satisfaction, just confirmation. Inside the house, I could hear Mason laughing at something Caleb said, the sound lighter than it had been in weeks. Ava was opening cabinets, organizing things without being asked. Normal. That word felt different now. "Call me if anything changes," I said. "It will," Thomas replied. "That's the nature of this." After the call ended, I stayed outside a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around me. Back in the city, things were already shifting, even if Brian didn't see it yet. He would. And by the time he did, it wouldn't be something he could fix with a single conversation or a quick decision. Back in Chicago, the afternoon was moving much faster than Brian expected. I didn't see it happen in real time, but I heard enough later to understand how quickly everything shifted, how one moment led straight into the next without giving anyone time to adjust. They had all shown up for her. His mother, his father, his younger brother, even his sister-in-law, who rarely involved herself in anything unless it felt important enough to be seen. And that was what this was supposed to be. Important. A beginning they could point to and say, this is where things finally made sense. Megan was at the center of it, exactly where she believed she belonged. Confident, composed, the kind of certainty that comes from thinking you've stepped into the right place at the right time. Brian stood beside her, one hand resting lightly at her back, already carrying himself like everything ahead had been secured. From what I was told, the room felt almost like a quiet celebration. Not loud, not inappropriate, but full of expectation. The kind that builds when people believe they already know how the story ends. The technician started the exam without hesitation. Routine, efficient. Nothing unusual at first. Questions were asked, dates were given, everything moved along the way it should have. Until it didn't. There was a pause. Small but noticeable. The technician adjusted the screen, her expression changing just enough that someone paying attention would have caught it. She didn't say anything immediately, just continued a little longer before stepping back. "I'm going to have the doctor take a look," she said. It was said calmly, professionally, the way things are said when they aren't meant to alarm anyone. And for a moment it worked. Megan frowned slightly. "Is something wrong?" "Just standard procedure," the technician replied. Standard has a way of holding a room together for a few seconds longer than it should. When the doctor came in, the energy shifted again, not dramatically, but enough that the earlier confidence didn't quite settle back into place. He reviewed the information quietly, asked a few questions, went over the dates Megan had provided. Then he looked at the screen again. "There's something we need to clarify," he said. Brian's posture changed at that point, not visibly to everyone, but enough that it would have been obvious to someone who knew him. "Clarify what?" he asked. The doctor didn't rush his answer. "The timeline you've given doesn't fully align with what we're seeing." Silence. Megan's expression tightened. I don't understand. It may be nothing, the doctor said carefully, but based on the measurements, the progression suggests an earlier starting point than expected. No one spoke right away, because even without a direct accusation, the implication was already there. Before anyone could respond, Brian's phone buzzed in his hand. Once, then again. He glanced at the screen, irritation flickering across his face, the kind that comes from being interrupted at the wrong moment. He stepped out into the hallway to take it. The call wasn't long, and when he walked back into the room, whatever had been holding that moment together before was already gone. He didn't explain anything. He just looked at Megan differently, and that was enough for everyone else in the room to understand that something had shifted, in more than one direction at the same time. The next morning, nothing looked dramatic on my side of the kitchen, and that made the contrast sharper. The light came through the window the same way it always did, the coffee brewed without interruption, and for the first time in a long while, there wasn't a sense that something was about to go wrong. Ava was already dressed, sitting at the table with a form Rachel had helped print out. Mason was scrolling through his phone, asking about nearby courts again, and Caleb was still half asleep, dragging his blanket behind him as he moved from the hallway to the chair beside me. Do we go to the school today? Ava asked. This afternoon, I said. She nodded and went back to reading. It was simple, quiet, normal in a way that didn't feel fragile. My phone buzzed on the counter. Thomas. I stepped outside before answering. What changed? I asked. There's been movement, he said. More than expected, actually. The initial review triggered follow-ups. A few institutions flagged inconsistencies in reported figures tied to Brian's company. I leaned against the railing watching a car pass slowly down the street. Meaning they're asking questions he can't easily answer, Thomas replied. Transfers that don't line up with declared income. Accounts that weren't fully disclosed. I didn't interrupt. And the agreement? I asked. It's being challenged, he said. Formally. Once incomplete disclosure is established, the original division doesn't hold the same weight. I exhaled slowly. This won't stay contained, he added. His attorney has already reached out. Jonathan Pike, I said. Yes. That made sense. Someone like Brian wouldn't handle this alone. Not once it moved beyond something he could explain away. And his business? I asked. There's pressure, Thomas said. Partners don't like uncertainty. Banks don't like gaps. The moment something looks off, they start protecting themselves. Of course they did. That's how it works, he continued. It's not about proving anything immediately. It's about the fact that now it's being looked at. After we ended the call, I stayed outside for a moment longer, letting the information settle into something steady. Back in Chicago, the pressure wouldn't have come all at once, but it would have been close enough to feel like it. Calls from the bank that didn't end with reassurance. Emails from partners asking for clarification that sounded polite, but carried weight underneath. Conversations that shifted in tone without anyone needing to explain why. And inside his own circle, things would have started to change too. His mother, who had been so certain the day before, would be asking sharper questions now. His brother wouldn't be as quick to defend him. The confidence that had filled that room at the clinic wouldn't have anywhere to go once doubt settled in. Because doubt doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Inside, Mason was already asking if we could leave early to check out the gym near the school. Ava had moved on to organizing the papers Rachel had left for us. Caleb was sitting at the table, drawing something that didn't need to be explained. I stepped back into the kitchen, closing the door behind me. We'll head out in a bit, I said. 3 heads nodded. No one asked about Brian. No one asked about what had happened at the courthouse. They were already adjusting, not because they understood everything, but because they didn't feel like they had to carry it anymore. And that made all the difference. A few days later, the call I never expected finally came through. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a glass, watching the water run clear when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize but didn't need to question. I let it ring once before answering. Hello. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to confirm who it was without needing to say it. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't what I had imagined months ago. Lauren. Yes. Another pause. Not hesitation exactly, more like someone trying to decide how much to admit out loud. I didn't know who else to call, Megan said. I set the glass down, drying my hands slowly. What do you need? She stopped, exhaling unevenly. Things aren't lining up the way they were supposed to. I didn't respond immediately. At the appointment, she continued, they said the timing might be off. Not wrong, just off enough that they want more tests. Her words came quicker after that, like once she started she couldn't stop. And then everything else started happening at the same time. Calls, questions, things Brian didn't explain. I thought I understood how everything fit together, but now… She broke off again. Now you don't, I thought. I didn't plan any of this, she said quietly. I believe that, I replied. Not because it changed anything, but because it was true in a way that didn't matter anymore. I thought he had everything handled, she added. That once things were settled, it would be simple. Simple. That word had a way of showing up in situations where it didn't belong. Megan, I said, keeping my voice even, this isn't something I can help you with. I know, she said quickly. I'm not asking you to. I just needed to say it out loud. There was something in her tone that wasn't guilt, not fully. It was uncertainty. The kind that settles in when the version of events you've been holding on to starts to shift. I hope you figure it out, I said. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't dismissal. It was just the truth. Thank you, she whispered, and then the line went quiet. I stood there for a moment, looking at the phone in my hand before setting it down. By the afternoon, another call came through. This one I expected. Mrs. Mitchell, the voice said, measured and controlled. This is Jonathan Pike, representing Brian Mitchell. I understand, I replied. We'd like to discuss the current situation, he said. There may be an opportunity to resolve certain matters more efficiently if we can speak directly. Efficient. The word carried the same weight it always did in conversations like this. Any communication goes through Thomas Reed, I said. A brief pause. Of course, he replied. We've been in contact. However, Mr. Mitchell believes a direct conversation could clarify. It won't, I said, not raising my voice. Silence. We'll proceed through counsel, I added. Another pause, longer this time. Understood, he said finally. The call ended without anything further. Inside the house, the afternoon moved. The way it was supposed to. Ava had a list of things she wanted to organize before school started. Mason had already found a place to play. Caleb followed wherever the noise was. I moved through it with them, not because I was avoiding anything, but because there was nothing left to step back into. Whatever was happening on the other side of this, it wasn't mine to manage anymore. The first time I heard his voice again, I knew I wasn't listening for the same reasons anymore. I was sitting at the edge of the bed, folding Caleb's clothes, when my phone lit up with his name. For a second, I considered letting it ring out the way I had before, but something about the stillness in the room made me answer. Lauren. His voice sounded different. Not softer, not stronger, just stripped of something it used to carry. What do you need? I asked. There was a pause. I didn't expect you to pick up. I almost didn't. Another pause, shorter this time. Things are complicated right now. I didn't respond to that. I let the silence sit between us until he continued. There are questions coming from everywhere, he said. The business, the accounts, even people I've worked with for years. And the situation with Megan, he trailed off. I waited. I thought everything was under control, he added. I thought once the divorce was finalized, things would settle. And now? I asked. They haven't, he said. Nothing is where it's supposed to be. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret in the way people expect it to sound. Just frustration that the outcome didn't match what he had planned. I need to figure out how to stabilize things, he continued. For the kids, if nothing else. That was the first time he said something that mattered. They need consistency, he said. And we should probably talk about how to handle that without everything else getting in the way. I stood up, moving to the window, looking out at the quiet street. There's already a structure in place, I said. You can follow it. I'm not talking about lawyers, he replied. I'm talking about us being able to communicate directly, keep things simple. Simple again. That's not happening, I said. Silence. I'm not trying to make things harder, he said after a moment. I'm trying to keep them manageable. For who? I asked. He didn't answer that, because the answer was obvious. Lauren, he said, his voice tightening slightly, you don't have to do this like this. I do, I replied, because this is the first time everything is clear. Another pause longer now. I'm not asking you to come back, he said finally. I didn't respond. But we can handle this better than letting everything fall apart, he added. It's already fallen into place, I said. That stopped him. Not the way you mean, I continued. The way it should have a long time ago. There was nothing left for him to say to that. Stick to the schedule, I added. Show up when you say you will. That's what matters. And everything else? He asked. That's yours, I said. The line stayed quiet for a second longer before he ended the call. I lowered the phone slowly, setting it down on the table beside me. There was no rush of relief, no sense of victory. Just a steady understanding that whatever connection had once been there no longer had a place in the life I was building. Not now. Not again. By the time everything caught up, our life had already moved forward without him. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything felt complete. No clear line between what used to be and what was now. It came together gradually in ways that didn't ask for attention. The house felt lived in. Not temporary anymore. Ava had claimed a corner of the living room as her own, books stacked in a way that made sense only to her. Mason had found his rhythm, afternoons spent at the court a few blocks away, already learning the names of people who would never know where he came from. Caleb stopped asking how long we were staying. He just assumed we were. That was the shift. School started without complication. Rachel had made sure of that, guiding us through the process without ever making it feel like something fragile. The kids adjusted the way children do when the weight around them changes. They didn't need every answer. They needed stability, and that's what they had. The legal side moved. More slowly, but it moved in the direction it was supposed to. What had been presented as complete was reviewed. What had been overlooked was brought forward. And the final outcome reflected something closer to reality than what had been signed that morning in court. I didn't push for more than that. I didn't need to. Brian stayed consistent in the one way that mattered. He showed up when he said he would. He kept conversations focused, limited to what involved the kids. There were no attempts to revisit anything else, no effort to return to something that no longer existed. That boundary held. We didn't meet outside of what was necessary. There were no long conversations, no gradual rebuilding, no version of understanding that blurred the line between past and present. What we had ended in that courtroom, even if it took time for everything else to align with it. And when it did, there was nothing left to reconsider. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over a schedule for the week, when Ava looked up from her homework. "Are we staying here?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I understood what she was really asking. "Yes," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to what she was doing. That was enough. Later that night, after the house had settled, I stood by the window, looking out at a street that no longer felt unfamiliar. There was no tension in it, no sense that something might break if I moved the wrong way. Just quiet. For a long time I thought walking away meant losing something, that it meant giving up a version of life I had spent years building. But what I learned instead was that not everything you hold on to is meant to last, and not everything that ends is something you were meant to keep. Some things only make sense once you step outside of them. I didn't leave with everything, but I left with what mattered. And that was the difference between starting over and finally moving forward.